All right, so we're talking about keeping track of your qualified mentors. If you're a church using the resources at pursuegod.org and you're trying to create a mentoring culture, pretty soon you're going to have a bunch of mentors that you've handed people off to. So you have to keep track of them. Chad, you want to just kind of set up that conversation just real quick for us?
Yeah. So when it comes to keeping track of our mentors, one of the things we're realizing as a campus is that the more we equip people, the better off we are. But then we need to know who are those qualified mentors, so that eventually, or hopefully, I'm not the only one making the handoff. Hopefully, our other leaders at the campus are also have the ability to make the handoff. So we need a way to keep track of who those mentors are, whether they're marriage mentors or just one-on-one mentors. So we're thinking through how to keep track of them. So we've been we need to make sure that everybody understands the handoff. That's important, and we've talked about that in previous discussions. But now, so we're talking about using a shared document to track mentors. So that would be a document that everybody has access to, so they know who's qualified to do this, because we want to make sure that we're making the handoff to somebody who knows what to do with it, that they're not going to drop the ball on it. And so we need a way to keep track of them. But then the last point of the conversation was, don't try to keep track of everything. And that's where maybe some of my questions are. As we think about making the handoff and keeping track of this stuff, what do we need to keep track of? For how long do we need to keep track of it? What's the important information versus just trying to get as much information as possible? So those are some of the ideas that we're talking through with this conversation. And so.
And Chad, before we get to those specific questions about the document and keeping track, that question number 2 is, have you ever made a handoff and describe it? And I'll just real quick explain 2 things that I did. Number 1, an individual guy that I handed off to a mentor that I trained up, and I didn't actually use a document. I didn't really have to sell that one, because the guy that I was handing off to a mentor, he was like, I'd love a mentor. Okay, so I didn't really have to sit down and have a meeting with them or anything like that. I just connected those 2 guys, and to this day they're still mentoring. It's pretty cool. A couple came up after church one Sunday, and they had some prayer needs in their marriage. And after I prayed with them, I said, hey, I think it'd be great if you had a marriage mentoring couple. And I could tell that they needed to be sold on the idea a little bit. So that's when I actually had the follow-up meeting with the 2 of them, and that's when I used the handoff document and the agenda and all that other stuff, because I needed to still sell them. I needed to use my pastoral leverage to sell them on the idea and the concept of mentoring. And once they were okay with it, then I connected them to the marriage mentors that could help them, and that relationship's going great as well. So those are some examples of how the handoff works. Sometimes it's more formal than other times, but the whole idea is, like you said, Chad, you're trying to just empower and connect people so that this mentoring culture can grow up at your church. So, after a while, you begin to realize, like you said, Chad, like, okay, well, those 2 people, like, how are they doing? How do I follow up? How do I remember who's doing who? Because you might have some mentors waiting in the wings that are ready to go, but you don't really know who they're connected to, and if anyone has connected them yet, because it's not just the pastors that are doing the handoff, right? Everyone should be able to eventually do that. So you can see that it could get a little overwhelming after a while. So let's skip to question 4. And this gets right to it, Chad and John. You guys can maybe address this. Do you think it will be helpful to track your mentors? Why or why not?
I think that certainly at the stage we are as a church right now, we need to be able to keep track of it. We want to, I think, just for quality assurance. And we're banking a lot on the tools, and so it's good that we know we'll have some level of consistency as long as we're using the tools. But in the short term, I want to make sure that I'm able to follow up with both the mentors and the mentees to see how it's going. And we're going to need, I can envision for the short term that we're going to go back to the same mentors over and over again until there's a second generation of mentors or a third generation. So in the short term, we need to know who can we trust that's going to be able to really move this person down the field in terms of their faith and their pursuit of God. So I think we'll need to keep track of it in the short term. I think long term, it just becomes so ingrained in our culture that we're not keeping track of it. We just know that people are just offering to mentor. I don't know how long we'll have to continue to do handoffs. I mean, probably always. There'll always be new people and visitors, but it's such a part of our culture that at some point we'll be unable to keep track of it, which sooner than later would be great.
Yeah, so Chad, just so I get an idea, Chad or John, how many people would you say are actually mentors at your campus the way we're describing it? Like they're either in a small group or one-on-one in mentoring, they're using the resources kind of on a regular basis to speak truth and share truth with someone in their life?
I think it's a pretty small number in the way that we're talking about it. There are a lot of people that are using the resources, but even some of our service leaders that they've taken multiple people through foundations, but I still don't think that they've bought into the system to the level of considering themselves mentors. I think that they're able to use the tools to have conversations. We've got a couple of marriage mentors. We've got a couple of young couples that are doing it. So I don't know. To answer your question, it's a handful of people. I mean, less than a dozen, probably.
Maybe half a dozen.
Yeah.
I think I'm not sure if your question was how many are equipped to do it or how many are doing it. I think equipped to do it, it's probably maybe a dozen now, 15. I know you had another training last Sunday. I just had a meeting Monday night with our Gateway team leaders, and we had some pretty specific conversations. None of our team leaders that were present are currently mentoring someone using the resources and using the approach we've been discussing, the tools, but they're all equipped to do it. And they all kind of had that aha moment like, oh yeah, I could do this and I should be doing this. But I was actively engaged probably 6 or less.
Then John, what do you think the bottleneck is? Is it that they're resistant to the structure of it, or they just haven't yet fully connected all the dots?
I don't think it's well. I think for some it may be resistance to the structure. It's just it's new. It's but I don't think it's resistant to the structure in the sense of maybe somebody who's been mentoring or discipling for years and years and they feel like their way is better. I don't think it's that type of resistance. I think it's just learning something new, getting out of their comfort zone, and just taking the first step, just doing it. Getting engaged.
Yeah. That's good. Well, yeah. This is a very specific conversation about structure and clarity, and it is. We're being. If anyone's watching this video and you haven't looked at the mentoring resources yet, pastor training, you should probably go look at that, or this conversation doesn't make any sense to you, because we're not talking about mentoring or discipling in some general, vague, ill-defined way. We're talking about using the flex method, using the resources. And what I've learned in my own personal ministry, because really what we're talking about for churches is true also for you individually. I have over a dozen people that I meet with every week, like what we're doing right here, that I meet with every week at a structured time, and I am very clear with those people. We're meeting at this time because I want to mentor you, and the more clear I am, the better it goes. Mm-hmm. The more nebulous I am, then, well, let me say it another way. The more the meetings where I'm very clear with people, other believers and stuff like that, where I'm mentoring another believer, almost all of those guys are mentoring someone else now because it's so clear and it's so reproducible and it's so simple. There are a couple situations where I'm a little bit more nebulous and it's a little just more relational, and I have to kind of just sort of squeeze in a conversation or maybe send a link. So it's because it's not very structured or clear, those guys aren't taking it to their family. They're not mentoring anyone, But the clearer I am on the method, the more reproducible it tends to be. And so that's why it's, you know, if you're thinking about this for your church, it really is a matter of saying, like, listen, this is how we're doing it. This is the structure. We've bought into this. It'll change your life. You should do it. I know it feels a little structured, but you can really do it.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. And I would say this, that you know, John mentioned this. Folks that have been discipling for years, they've been investing in other people. They have their method or their way. They're very standoffish when it comes to, because the more specific we get, the more clear we get about, no, do it this way, trust me, this will help it to be reproducible. The next generation will be able to do it. Those people are a little standoffish. But just as evidence, last Sunday, I did a mentor, sort of an impromptu mentor training here. A couple of folks expressed interest, so I went through the lobby at 10:30, and I just grabbed a couple of additional guys and said, you need to go through this. And people that are newer to the church, who have never been discipled or who have never discipled anybody, are absolutely excited about it. They're beginning to think, oh, I could do this. And so there is something to that, just that freshness or that willingness when they're not so ingrained in what they've always done. They're willing to look at it. So I don't know if that's instructive or not, except that the newer believers and people that are maybe haven't made disciples, which is a lot of our church, right? They're never really engaged in disciple making, are very receptive to using the tools and the resources. It's the guys that have been doing it for years that are shying away. So.
Well, and that's the difference between a fisherman and a Pharisee. And I mean, no offense, because I've been that Pharisee. I've been that guy that had my way, and that's why Jesus invited fishermen. They didn't really have a strategy. Nobody had ever told them that they could make an impact in someone's life, whereas the Pharisees were already sort of self-righteous, and they felt like they already knew it all. And I mean, I don't want to go too far with that analogy. I'm not saying that those established Christians are not believers. I'm just saying that it's easy to sort of get in that mentality. And I'll confess for myself, I've always been a disciple maker for as long as I can remember. I've always had a heart to help people pursue God. I've always been a disciple maker, but only when I started using this tool and this methodology did I become a disciple maker. So I always made disciples, but I hardly ever made disciple makers. And that's what we're trying to get people to go full circle. We're not just trying to make disciples. We're trying to make disciple makers. That guy's not going to understand and simple and reproducible. And that's really what's at stake here. And so let's because we're kind of we're wandering into another conversation. Let me just finish this particular conversation with that last question. Chad and John, answer this if you can. Explain why a discipleship culture can eventually be difficult to track. And is this a good thing?
Well, at the beginning, you know, the lead pastor is tracking his 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 mentors. But ideally, that next level, you know, grows to 30, 40, 50, and then underneath that is another level of 30, 40, 50 because it goes generational, you know. And so eventually, just like the lead pastor only has so many connecting spots to build relationships, he only has so much time in the day to track his mentors. So, you know, hopefully it outpaces the available time that the pastor would have to track it.
Yeah, so is that a good thing?
Yeah, I think that'd be a great thing. Yeah, I think it'd be fantastic.
Chad, you're an organizational guru. Is that a good thing for you? You like your org charts and you like to have your ducks in a row. Does that stress you out to think it could grow beyond your ability to track?
Not at all. I would love to not have to keep track of things. Yeah, no, I think it's good. I wonder. I guess Brian, I would ask you the question: if it's important for me to, as we get this launched here at our campus, it would be important for me to have this doc where I'm keeping track of a dozen mentors or so, and share that with John and some of our other leaders. So as people come up front, they can look at that. Oh, we've got mentors ready for you, and we can make the handoff. So then, would you recommend the next generation of mentors do that? That they have their own doc of go-to people? I mean, is it not something that goes down the line as well?
No, that's a great question. Because I was thinking about that in my own life. I told you these guys that I'm mentoring. So many of these guys are already mentoring other people, and I know about those people because I'm praying for them. So my buddy Carson that I'm mentoring, I know the 4 guys that he's mentoring. I know their names because we talk about their names, right? And I pray that it comes up in our meetings all the time. Hey, how's it going with those guys? And I'm praying for Carson in relationship to those guys. But Carson's going to do that for his 4 guys, but am I going to do that for that 3rd generation? I'm not going to know those names, and I'm not sure that I really even need to know those names, right?
Yeah.
So I mean that's how I'm viewing it personally, and that's now go back to the church. I have a feeling when that culture gets established, probably, I mean, we'll see, we're still early in this, but probably you sort of abandon that document because you're just like, guys, great job, but it's beyond, or I mean, maybe you keep that document still because maybe you still want to know who your officially qualified guys are at your campus, but you got to just make sure that everyone that's, okay, I think what I say in that article is what you can do is you give people the authority to share that document with people that they're mentoring. So eventually that document's got hundreds and thousands of names on it of guys that are just using it to keep track so that you could just kind of be in the loop. But I don't even know if it's really even that useful for you to look at that document.
Well, yeah, and I can't imagine that would be helpful to anybody at some point. I guess what I'm wondering is, would it be wise for you to show Carl that doc and say, hey, Carl, you got these 4 guys, but if they start mentoring people, show them that they can keep this list of guys that they've trained. So as we run into people, and so maybe a doc is good for 2 generations or something. So you introduce the idea of the doc to the guy that you're mentoring so that he can keep track, and then he can introduce the idea of a doc to his 4 guys so they can keep track if they start mentoring.
Yeah, I guess when I'm thinking about it for me personally, it's not a document. What I do with the 3 guys that I mentor on Wednesday nights, let's say, there's 3 guys in their 20s. One guy's already mentoring someone. The other 2 guys are really like actively pursuing some guys to mentor. And they know that I pray for them and those guys all the time. So they know that I'm aware of those names because I'm modeling it. So I would imagine that they'll just do this. My hope is that they'll just do the same thing, like pray for your guys and the guys they're mentoring. So it's kind of like maybe that's the answer is you pray for your kids and for your grandkids, So, but you don't need to know your great-grandkids' names necessarily, but your kids will know your great-grandkids' names because they'll be their grandkids. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So maybe it's just, again, the document is a little bit more formal for churches, and but maybe we eventually drop the doc altogether because it just becomes so ingrained in the culture that you pray for your kids and your grandkids. Yeah.
I had a question, Brian. I think this is on topic. If it's not, you can just cut it off short. But let's assume that you have 6 or 7 kind of frontline mentors, and you're up at the front of the church, and someone comes to you, and you want to connect them, but you kind of have a feeling that your 6 or 7 frontline people are already full. They're already mentoring multiple people. Mm-hmm. Does it make more sense to go out and find that 8th child mentor, first generation, or do you hand them off to one of your 6, but encourage them to hand them off? And now you've got 2 handoffs. Does that make the mentee in this case feel a little kind of shuffled down the road? Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, that's a great question, and to me that question makes the most sense for someone walks into the church and they're pretty unconnected, right? So that's where I think that the tracking is somewhat important, because I think what I think you would say to the guy is, could I find you a mentor? You're not going to say, I'm going to hand you off to someone who's going to hand you off to someone who's going to hand you off to someone.
Right.
So if you're up front praying with somebody, you say, can I find you a mentor? And then you go to your community and say, hey, who's available? But that person doesn't know that they don't know the generations of people you're going through, right?
Okay.
Or maybe the other answer to that, John, and Chad, this is for you to think about, you're an organizational mind, is maybe just even within your structure in your church is you're just very clear about who should be up front praying with people. And potentially one way to mitigate that is to say, only come up front and pray with people if you've got, if you either have room to mentor someone, or if you have people that you want to connect as mentors. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So if either you can't mentor someone or you don't have someone waiting in the wings personally to mentor someone, then don't be up there and pray with people. We've got plenty of other people that are available, right? Potentially, that's, again, you'll have to see how that works out, but
yeah. The other thing I think about that is that if to go back to the illustration of your kids and your grandkids, at some point your kids leave the house, and so if I've got 8 people maybe that I've personally mentored and I brought them along and they get it and they understand what we mean by discipleship and they're doing it with other people in their lives, at some point I can say, God bless you, and I'll continue to pray for you, but we don't need to continue to meet. And so I can start new relationships, or I can start a new maybe cluster of, start a new mentor training or a new whatever, and start with a new group of people.
And we have a word. We have a word for that in our library. If you go in the resources, look up 3 mentoring lists, and those 3 lists are your hit list, your active list, and your passive list. And so you're just describing moving someone from your active list to your passive list, and that's when they move out of the house and they're so into it. They've got so many mentoring relationships. They don't really need you to mentor them weekly, but you maybe still touch base with them once a month or once a quarter or whatever, right? So they're on your passive list now. So on my phone, the way I keep my stuff organized is every mentoring relationship I have, I either call it active, passive, or hit list. And so when in my note app on my phone, if I type in the word active, it'll pull up all of my active people that I meet with every week, and that's where I keep prayer requests for them. I don't use a Google Doc. I just use my Keep app. And so I don't actually have anyone on my passive list yet, but I'm sure that in a year or so I'll move some of those people over to my passive list. So I can still pray for them, but I'm not talking with them every single week, and so that's kind of helpful to have that kind of language and to understand that. Now again, how that relates to the church organizational, I mean, it's really all the same thing, isn't it? It's whether it's my own personal ministry or whether it's the church formally. But this is interesting. Let me just close with this question. We talk about the infrastructure, the discipleship infrastructure in your church. It's parents, small groups, and individual mentors. So of those 3 things, which ones can you track and which ones can you not track? Like, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about tracking all of those? Clearly we're talking about tracking mentors. So let's put that one down. Mm-hmm. Are we also talking about tracking small groups and parents? What do you think?
I don't know if we're talking about tracking in the same way. I think, well, we need to track our small group leaders, but I think we need to track something different.
Mm.
And so, and the same thing with parents. It's because we're not. I mean, hopefully, with the parents, obviously, we want them to be discipling their kids and being intentional about doing that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's sorry, I'm just trying to think through that. I'm just not sure. We're not tracking the same thing. I mean, I think we're talking about the one-on-one mentors is where it's really going to go. I mean that's kind of the bottom line, I guess. That's where the majority of the ministry is going to be. That's not well said either.
Yeah, it's a hard one, isn't it?
I'm having a hard time articulating. There is a difference, though. I mean, we're definitely tracking something different. I mean, with the parents, we're just teaching them to use the tool with their kids.
Mm-hmm.
But if they want to use it in the workplace, then they jump over into the other category where they become mentors. In a different sense.
Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah, so, it's a hard. I don't really have an answer to that. I just think that's a question that maybe every campus or church is going to answer a little differently. I think it's worth having that question out there, and as you begin to use the tools, you can begin to answer that question. I think you'll answer it as you use the tools. It'll be clear to you what you need to do, even though it's not clear to us what that looks like right now. Let me just throw one more thing out, and then we'll close this conversation. We say in that document that you should try a Google Doc. I actually think potentially a better way to do it is to create a private Google Plus community. Don't create a public community. Create a private community, and then as people get qualified, you add qualified mentors to your community, because then it becomes more of a discussion board. So, John, to go to your question, when you said, well, what do you do if you've got this need? So let's go back to, I got a guy coming up and I pray with him and I say, I want to find you a mentor. Is that okay? He said, yeah, that's great. So now what you do is you go to the community and you post that to the community. You say, hey guys, I just prayed with John this morning at church. He's new to the church. Here's a brief description of what his needs might be. Let me know if you want to mentor him. And so in the comments on that post, John, anyone in your community can say, hey, I would love to help him out, or hey, I've got a guy that I've been training up. Why don't we try to connect him? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's great.
So I think that would replace the document, and potentially that might be easier to manage only because it's just like a discussion board for everyone who's bought into the system.
Yeah, so as John trains up mentors and they begin to train up mentors, they can add them to this community, or they can invite them to the community once they're qualified, once they understand it and can do it and they're ready to go. So anybody on that is a potential mentor.
Yeah,
so you don't need to know them. Just know they're qualified.
Right, and on Google Communities then, so you're the administrator, but you give permission to anyone who's a member to invite other members, But then you just have to be clear with everyone, is make sure that you only invite them if they've gone through mentor training with you and they've bought into the system. Then you can invite them, and now they're part of that mentoring community and hopefully eventually that just becomes almost everyone in your church, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, we'll leave it at that. Great conversation. So any leadership teams that are having it, again, you can check that out. It's called Keeping Track of Your Qualified Mentors. Check out some of those other related resources at the bottom of that conversation.